the idea today is that we want to talk about Shohin Bonsai, and so we will, it turns out if you're, so how many of you are new to Bonsai, like your first year? Now, of those who just raised your hand, how many of you have been able to find every item that you've been ever looking for? It's easy to find trees, they're cheap and plentiful, right? No? Has anyone been able to find every single thing they've been looking for so far? No, so that's kind of why we're doing the program today. One of the key areas of focus that Matt has been bringing to the club has been a lot of programs focused on how to create material. Because if we don't start making this material now, we're not going to have it later. There is no magic bonsai factory that's been cranking out trees for us. And so what we're going to show is that it actually can be a lot of fun to do this process on our own. When I first started bonsai 32 years ago, I asked my teacher why there aren't more black pines. And he said, well, we can't import them. And I thought to myself, if we don't start growing them now, we'll never have them. And so I started growing trees from seed. FYI, you do not need to start from seed. Life is too short. The thought of it stresses me out right now. But you can really start growing trees at any stage of development. You can start with really old trees that are hundreds of years old. You can start with seeds or other propagated material. That's essentially why we're doing this program today. And I thought to start out, I wanted to focus on junipers because they're harder to kill, another good thing for beginners. And I wanted to share some pictures of small trees. And why do I focus on small trees sometimes? Because they take less time to grow. If you want big trees, buy a big tree. Starting with a small tree and trying to make it big can take forever. So before anything else, I wanted to show just some fun displays. These pictures were all from the 50th anniversary of the #1 show in the world for small trees. The 20 centimeters was the maximum size. And so someone really likes junipers, it turns out, and this person put together a display. These trees were all made very, very recently. So the way all these trees were made, they followed the same process. They took a medium-sized tree about yay big, and they killed off all the branches on top, and they kept one branch alive at the bottom, and then they carved everything else on top. That's where these came from. Now the next slide. And so to zoom in on one of these things, you can kind of see this little funky thing is very, very young in training. The deadwood work is relatively rough, but very good technique. And the foliage has no shape or form whatsoever. This is a fresh bonsai. But that's where these things came from. You start with a bigger tree and you cut it down. Now, if you're one of the people that takes Matt's advice and goes to bonsai.com and gets a little start, or you just find someone that has a juniper, and you literally, if you clean up the clippings from today's workshop that Neil was doing, you can actually start those cuttings, and then you've got a free start to your own little tree. We're going to talk about how to make this kind of movement in the trunk. And the white parts are all dead. The only part of this tree that is alive along the trunk is this skinny little strip that comes up the side, goes around the back, comes out here, swoops down, goes around to the back again, over to the side, and then that feeds, it provides all the vasculature to get resources from the roots to the foliage. And what the trunk is doing is kind of two things from the bonsai perspective. There's movement. This is not a straight line to get from here to there. And there's also twisting movement. And when you're working on a really young start, you need both movement. It's got to travel through space following an interesting path. And you need that twist. We do that because that's how junipers grow in nature. And we'll look at some trees in nature to talk about that real quick. Let's look at another one. I wanted to kind of quickly go through just different examples of very different approaches to making these small junipers, because if you are interested in making one of these little trees for yourself, there are a lot of very different ways to do it, and I want you to pick a model for your trees that is something that's kind of pleasing or satisfying to you. Much skinnier trunk, but look how interesting the movement is. We've got one twist around the back, but with these wonderful little squiggling lines. Those were all big branches that were cut off. The trunk comes down and out to here, but it's very slender, different than what we had seen previously. And notice this one, it kind of goes straight up, but notice how the lifeline does kind of a loop-the-loop around the trunk. It comes up, swings around the back, comes around again, comes around another time, up over the top and into the middle. And this is a good example of a tree that's been trained a little bit longer. Notice how the little pads, we call them, the branch pads or little blocks of foliage, are much more clearly defined. It's not just a green blob. You can start to see as we flip through these, just these very different approaches to junipers. This is another very fresh example of a really big tree that was cut down. This is a favorite right here. When you do the carving, it's not just stripping the bark away, but they're actually creating a lot of three-dimensional shapes in here. The inside of the trunk is really being gouged out, and notice how all of these dead parts have these wonderful twisting movements on it. We're going to talk about exactly why we do that and how we do that if you want to create that effect. All of these characteristics are based on how junipers grow in nature. This one has much less deadwood. It has more undulating movement, but we do see deadwood features here and there. Also a much heavier foliar block. Again, these are all examples from the best show in the world, and so while some of you may like some more than others, they were all acceptable to show off at a fairly highfalutin crowd. This is another one where you can see we have multiple lifelines. There's a lifeline in the back, a lifeline in the front, and then another one off to the side here. And you can see the whole thing is twisting with all kinds of wonderful big heavy carved things. This was probably a giant straight branch that shot straight out, and that was all carved. People have different opinions about whether or not they like the carving. It can be done well, it can be done poorly. But there's no reason to not work on a tree just because it has something that needs carving. The trick is to how do you do it in kind of a natural fashion. And another one. And another one. So notice just these really, really different approaches, but it's all kind of the same basic idea in a lot of these. Now notice this tree is a little bit bigger and we've got a little more complexity in the branch design. We'll just talk about bonsai design a tiny bit. In general, when you're working on bonsai, when you buy a tree, you're buying a trunk. And your job is to kind of decorate or adorn the trunk with branches or a foliar design. Actually, if you go back to the previous slide, notice how this is essentially one big green gumdrop. You can't really tell what's going on. Maybe if you're being generous, you can say there's kind of a block right here, one right there, and one right there. But the three blocks are all kind of next to each other, and they're all the same shape and size. Whereas the very next tree, it makes the tree look bigger, even though the two trees are almost exactly the same size. When you start creating these discrete blocks, you can create more complexity in the foliar design. And I mean, this is the guy that worked on this tree is one of the best guys in the absolute world. And this is what that top tier branch work looks like on junipers. And again, you can see the trunk. The trunk goes almost to the sides of the pot, and yet we have these wonderful twists and turns with some subtle deadwood features kind of sticking out. And this whole tree, probably from the bottom to the top, is only about, again, 20 centimeters or 8 inches. This one's a little bigger. And so this tree is maybe 15 inches tall, and so you have more opportunities for complexity. But I did want to show you a couple trees that provided a different look at what you can do with the branches. But again, what an awesome example of how crazy twisting turning is. Now, close to none of these trees are collected, meaning almost none of these junipers came from nature. Why? Too small. It's hard to find something that is 100 years old that has gone like this, all in this tiny little convenient package. If you're finding something in nature, it's much easier to collect. Medium trees are very hard to find. Large trees are not that hard to find. Giant trees are easy to find, but we don't want to, they don't fit on our cars. And our backs can't necessarily handle that. And so we tend to grow Shohin junipers from scratch, and for larger junipers we tend to work more with collected material, whether from someone's garden, from nursery stock, or from up in the mountains somewhere. And so, was that the last one in that folder? Cool, so let's go down to the next folder. And so that's just to kind of whet your appetite of, and now's the bait and switch. That's like the end of the journey. And now we're going to talk about why we do it that way and what the kind of first steps are. This is, any ideas where this is?
Sierras.
Yeah. Where in the Sierras? Is that Northern Sierra, Southern Sierra? What do you think?
Eastern Sierra?
About 11,000 feet.
It's like right on the pass. This is very close to Carson Pass on Highway 88, so Northern California, right on the line between kind of the east and the west, but closer to the east side of the Sierra. And this is what they call tree line. These are the absolute highest elevations at which woody plants grow. Above that point right there, it's just grasses. Nothing else grows higher. And what happens at that elevation is this concept called Krummholz, which means crooked wood in German. And it's when a tree that normally grows straight starts getting all twisty. And what happens is some of these trees will be relatively straight, but there might be one right next to it that starts doing really interesting things. Now, I love going hiking up here all the time. I take groups up there because it's just great inspiration to see how bonsai works. These are all Sierra junipers, by the way, which has a new botanical name, Juniperus grandis, and they're just really, really cool. Any idea how high up this is?
11,000?
A little lower than that. At this point, I'm probably standing around 9,000, 9,200. That might be 93, 4, 500 up there. So, but yeah, we're getting close to 10,000 feet up there. All right, what's next? So this is a really common pattern. You're going to say, anyone have any ideas which way is east, which way is west? What do you think? Is this west or east? This is east, because in California, the wind pretty much comes from the west and goes to the east. And so if you've spent a lot of time in the mountains, you can't get lost if you're looking at the trees. Bonsai people can navigate better. And so this is right on top of a ridge, and this thing gets blasted with wind, snow, rain, dust, whatever the wind can kick up. And there's this massive elemental pressure right here. I guess they get insane gusts of wind all winter long. And this is what happens, is naturally the windward side will die out, and this side that's sheltered preserves the lifeline. So that's why we say when we're creating bonsai, our trees all tell stories. And the story of this one is, I live in an alpine environment that's very harsh, and there's predominant wind in a very obvious direction. This is about a 10-minute walk from a parking lot, if you're curious. Next. This is one of my favorite trees. It's like a bonsai. How tall do you think this is?
3 feet.
Yeah, it's about like 4 feet, 5 feet, somewhere there. It's pretty small. And the trunk's about like this. It could be anywhere from, 500 to 1,500 years old. And the trunk just twists and rises and twists and rises. And it's a great example. The wood is white, the bark is brown. Nature does that. So I know a lot of people find it super artificial, because it kind of is when we color the trunks and deadwood on junipers. But it comes from nature. So some trees are straight in nature, some are crooked. I have a straight juniper. I can just claim that's natural, and that's how I designed my bonsai. I saw a twisty juniper in nature once. That's how I designed mine. One funny thing about claiming nature for our bonsai is we have to choose our models. And in general, the conventional approach is to choose trees that convey great age, character, and beauty. Straight lines are characteristic of a species, but they don't really have a lot of character because every other straight tree is also straight. When you have trees that twist and turn, they are unique, beautiful objects that we appreciate, and that's why we look for junipers with twists and turns. If you have any questions about that, ask me, because if you take away nothing else, that would be one of the key points. Next. This is probably my very favorite juniper. I don't know how many thousands of years old this is. The only part that's alive is it grows out of this. So this is a big throne. If we zoomed out, there's just this rock sitting on the side of the hill with this juniper on it. And it comes out of the rock, and this is the only part that's alive. Most of the green's all down there, except for this one crazy twisting lifeline up there. And my understanding is that nature carved the little dragony thing up on the corner there. So any guesses how big this one is?
10 feet? 3.5?
3, 4 feet.
Next slide. That is not a small tree. And I'm not standing on it, I'm standing on the rock right behind it, but the thing is giant, and it is just the craziest, oldest thing you can imagine. And if I'm standing up straight, I'm 6 feet tall, so yeah, it's a pretty big tree. All right, what's the next one? Here's another one with a person for scale. Semi-cascade bonsai is a thing you see in nature. Now, is this an incredibly rare thing that's really, really special? Yes, and that's why I go up and check this out. But It's just an awesome, awesome example of how these junipers respond to their environment. And that's kind of why we designed juniper bonsai this way. How tall do you think this one is?
50 feet.
Three and a half.
That's why you gotta mess with people. It's like this tall. This is bonsai size. This we could take home and fit in a pot. But this is why we don't care about the surface roots or nabari and juniper bonsai. They really do grow out from in between cracks in the rock. And that's why we don't really judge trees lower when they don't have those attractive surface roots that we love seeing on deciduous trees or pines. Again, I don't need to ask you which way the wind is going because it's kind of obvious where the elemental pressure is. But this tree, as this dies and erodes, this keeps growing. And the tree will probably, over time, really, really slowly move towards the east. All right, what's next? And this is the last slide I wanted to make just to show that this is just a tree on the side of the road. The red color we see on the bark and the white is 100% natural in some cases. And so this is just such beautiful deadwood. Notice how nothing is straight. Notice how you get that good twist. And notice how the dead branches have the same kind of characteristics as the trunk. If you have a straight trunk and all your branches have all these squiggles on them, it's going to look funny. And so what's challenging is how do you start creating the curves in the branches that kind of evoke the same kind of movement you see here in the tree. Okay, so this is the last pretty thing we'll see. Now we'll go through what the process looks like at a super high level. All right, so just a couple examples of, and I removed the foliage on this just so you can get an idea. When you have a rooted cutting, or if you start with a whip that you pick up at a nursery somewhere, you're going to put a piece of wire on it and put some movement on it. And the movement is going to be interesting, and it's going to be twisting. And so the next will show this is interesting movement. May or may not need to like it, and it may or may not need to be oriented that way. You can take this whole thing and stand it up at 90 degrees and have it be an upright form. But the idea is that the radius of any individual bend is different than the radius of the other bends. The length the trunk travels between bends will change, and the direction and orientation of those multiple radius, differently spaced out bends will all change. So in other words, you want variety. So this is just one example of interesting movement. This is another one. Like there's no really simple pattern that can describe that. Because it kind of goes up and over, then around and forward and back, then forward again, and then it kind of does a bunch of twisty things and goes out. What's cool about this step is that any of you can do this. It's harder than it looks to make it come out well, but when you're starting with these young plants, your job is just to make it interesting, and then you just kind of let it grow for the next 5-10 years, depending on how big you want the tree to be. 20-30 years if you want a high-quality Shohin. Yeah, so here's another example of interesting movement, where it's going through space following an interesting path. There are a lot of common patterns that you will see in your own work the first time you try this. It might look like this. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. One reason that you will see this in work that you do is that you're going to bend it right up until it feels like you can't bend it ananymore, and that's the radius of the turn. And then you're going to try to bend the next one, and you're going to run into that same limitation, and then the same limitation again. And so when that's the case, get better technique and or heavier wire to get more of a bend. And then don't make it just back and forth. Have it go front and back, and overall make the direction more interesting. What's another bad example? So is this good movement or bad movement?
Bad.
Is it good or is it bad?
Bad.
Too sharp.
Why is it bad?
Too square.
Repetition.
So it's too regular. There's a couple things going on. If you kind of look at, pretend this is a sine wave, because we all remember trig, right? And so the crest and trough of each wave essentially create an absolutely straight line. So any one section of the trunk has good movement, but it's not moving anywhere through space. The center line is going in a straight line. And if you let this thicken up about this thick, it'll just look like a slightly undulating trunk going in a perfectly straight line. Whereas if you just took this and took the top half and just bent it over, it would be twice as good. So you have to kind of pay attention to not only what bends are you making, but what line that trunk is following. Yeah.
When you're getting started with whips like this, would you do a whole bunch of them, like 5 or 6, 10? Just in
It's
case
as
they
if you're a
start
plant in
snapping?
the audience to ask that question. Yes. If you're going to be growing trees from scratch, I only recommend doing them in batches. Half dozen, dozen, if you're ambitious, 100. Like when I'm doing things from seed, I'll do a batch of, I used to do pines 100 a year, I would start, give or take. Sometimes it would accidentally be 250, sometimes it'd be fewer. For cuttings, yeah, it's a horrible thing to have too many trees. You heard Bill talking about what it takes to provide all this material for you all. Yeah, and the reason you do different ones is, whoops, I made a mistake. Or, oh, the first 3 all look exactly the same. I'm right-handed and I noticed they all twisted the same way. Maybe I should force myself to twist it the other way. And so whether it's genetic differences between plants or anything, any species you grow, I highly recommend having more than one. You can learn twice as much in 1 year. If you have one juniper, you can learn one way to water it, one way to fertilize it, one way to repot it, one way to wire it, carve it, bend it. If you have 2 junipers, you have doubled the number of lessons you can learn in 1 year. And so there's a common bad joke in bonsai where someone says they've been doing bonsai 10 years and someone will follow up and ask, well, have you been doing 10 years of learning or did you just do the same 1 year 10 times? And a lot of people resemble that latter remark, sadly. Are there any other slides in here? Oh, so this is what the process would look like with a slightly older tree, and we'll look at live examples. But with foliage on it, you still see we've got essentially a straight line. There's some other branches, and that's the before. The after picture just looks like this. And then while we're still on this slide, notice how we now have kind of boring but kind of interesting movement. Why is the movement not better here? Because the whip is too thick. If I'd started this a year earlier, I would have been able to get better movement down below. Now, of course, this tree's only that big, so it's totally fine to have a little bit straight. Notice how I didn't cut off any of those side branches. Those side branches will also get wired when they get bigger, and those are, whether or not we use them in the design, they are going to be future deadwood features. Maybe one of these will be the trunk in the future. Maybe one of those will be a deadwood feature. Maybe they'll come off, but we keep them all to thicken the trunk and create future features. So we'll have examples of that very soon. And so here is a super duper quick version of the entire process. All of these pictures are used without permission from my first book, the Little Book of Bonsai. So if any of you have the little book, these are all in there. But this is a field-grown Itoigawa juniper that's about, it grew in the ground for 10 years. I dug it up and stuck it in a pot for a couple years, and so it was really healthy. If you want to grow a trunk from scratch, you're going to buy those little whips and spend 10 years making this. And this is what success looks like after 10 years. You're not going to use normal bonsai techniques. No one will really know how to help you. You're just going to focus on making this part interesting, and these things are just bushy, and they are going to thicken up the trunk. One common trick with those trees at that early stage is maybe you just need a bunch of bushes in your landscape and your spouse may not know it, and you're going to say, oh, I think these would be really great trees to kind of line the walkway over there. And you're secretly growing a trunk, but everyone else will just think it's a shrub. Kids will fall on it, that'll be fine, like it doesn't matter. And so, but when you get to the styling, so in other words, this is a key point. I did a whole chapter in my new book just to make this one point. You're either growing a trunk or you're doing bonsai. And so you get to kind of pick and choose what you're doing, but when you go to a workshop, you need to know which they are because the techniques don't overlap, whether you're going to do the trunk building stuff or kind of what follows. This work was all done in half a day by one of the best people in the world. Not me, but a good friend of mine, Daisaku Nomoto. So he said, let's see, is there a more interesting angle we can plant this at? And he said, you know what, if we kind of turn it over, we can create a really interesting line in the trunk. Never be wedded to whatever angle a tree is growing at. You can change that. And because we don't care about roots and junipers, we can change the angle any old time. So the next step was to cut off a few branches. So he cut off a few branches. But like so far, you all can do this. You can buy a thing that looks like a shrub. You can just arbitrarily cut a third of the branches. That wasn't totally arbitrary. The next step's a tiny bit trickier, which is he did some carving on the juniper. Notice how we've got those nice curving deadwood shapes that we saw in those first pictures. This is probably the first time since those first slides you're like, I might be able to see where we're going with this. All you do from here is wire and shorten the remaining branches, and then it looks like that. This is the first styling of this tree. It rarely looks that good. Actually, I think, is there one more photo? Yeah, we did all that in one day. And it was kind of cute. I've been growing bonsai for a long time, as has Daisaku, and typically you don't do that much work and cut off 90% of the roots and jam it into a tiny pot. And I said to Daisaku, this is going in the book. Do you think that'll live? And he's like, yeah, maybe. And I said, yeah, I probably might need to mist the foliage or something once a day. He's like, no, you need to mist it once an hour for the next 3 months. And so I stuck it in a greenhouse, and I had an electric leaf, and I misted it. It didn't lose a branch. It was 100% healthy. Now, this guy knows what he's doing. He cut roots that connected to the dead parts. He kept the roots that connected to the live parts. He made very conscious decisions about all of this, and he bends it in a way that doesn't really weaken the branches. This is what a 5-year apprenticeship plus 20 years as a practicing professional will get you. And so that's the step, is you start with, first you make a bush, then you take the bush, you carve it down, you end up. This tree was wired one more time after this, and it went into the Pacific Bonsai Expo, one of the top shows in the country. And so it can take, it was a very modest tree for that event, but it could get into a show after just 2 stylings. And so it actually doesn't take that long in the big picture when you're starting something from scratch. So we're about to jump to live stuff. Any pictures about or questions about anything we've seen so far? Yes?
So you said that he said that it would not live without, misting it every hour. Did you mist it every hour, or did you transfer it out to a different pot soon after that?
Nope, didn't touch it for 2 years. And so there's an amazing device. Any of you who are familiar with greenhouses will have heard of this thing called an electric leaf. And it's a little metal box with a little paddle on it with an incredibly sensitive balance. And what you do is you tune that balance to almost perfectly neutral. Get this, when the mister comes on, the weight of the mist pushes it down, and as it weighs down, that turns off the mister. As it evaporates, it rises, and then it turns back on. So at night, it may only go off once, but during a hot day, it might go off 8 times. And so, in other words, it provides consistent moisture.
What's that called again?
Electronic leaf. Yeah, it's like a $500 greenhouse device. They're really handy. I coincidentally had installed one because I used to import azaleas from Japan, and those need misting because they come in bare root from another country. And so I just happened to have an ICU for it. Yeah, right over here. Oh, I'm sorry, back here first.
Jonas, could you talk just for a minute about the comment that you made that the artist identified the roots that would support? I had never heard that, so could you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, this is a really, really important point in juniper design. Often when we've got a big juniper shrub and we're going to do a lot of branch pruning and a lot of root pruning, and when you do our initial deadwood design, to do it well and successfully, we actually have to consider that we're preserving a line between roots we want to keep and the branches we want to keep. And so, just to very shamelessly plug my second book, the entire last chapter of the book is a case study of a juniper, and Daisaku did that same juniper too. And he will spend hours, like he spent hours on the deadwood design of that, drawing it out and looking at all the roots and just this root connects to that, and like he literally figured out the entire system of the tree before making any decisions. In demos, people just like whack on everything and they jam it all in the pot, and it may or may not do well afterwards, but that's why branches sometimes die after those aggressive demos. And so when I'm working with field-grown material like this, I've become way, way slower, and I spend a lot of time studying where is every last lifeline going. Tiny example, I once bought a dozen trees from Bonsai Northwest, field-grown junipers, good-sized trunks, and one of my trees died after 2 years. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why would a juniper up and die 2 years since it was last repotted? And I did a little autopsy, took it out of the pot, and what I realized is not one root had grown in the 2 years I'd owned it. The tree died when it was dug, but junipers, if you provide moisture to the foliage, allows the tree to produce new roots. What had happened was the tree had actually grown for a year based on reserves inside, and it was utilizing the moisture on the outside, and it just finally ran out of gas after 2 years. And what I noticed is the tree had one giant root that he had to cut off to get it in the pot, and one giant sacrifice branch that had to come off. The sacrifice branch connected to all the living roots, and the big root that he cut connected to all the living branches. There was no crosstalk. There will be a few ahas for those of you that have worked with collected or field-grown material. Yes?
I was wondering, when you had it tipped on its side, the whole plant, how long did you have it in that position for?
One more time?
You know when you were fixing up the juniper,
Yeah.
and you had the whole thing tipped on its side, how long was it in that position for?
Oh, just while he was working on it.
Oh.
Yeah, and so it was potted like that, and when we repotted it at that new angle. And so now it's permanently at that angle. The tree was originally, remember the roots were going kind of straight up before, and so literally what we often do is if you want to work on a tree on its side, when it's in a plastic container like this, we'll just get a larger like terracotta pot, and what you do is you set the pot in a bigger pot at an angle, and you can use blocks and towels or something to kind of keep it there while you're working on it. It's just a way to work on the tree essentially. And then because we repotted it, then it went right back. In that example I mentioned in the book, we actually created a crate and we grew the tree at an angle for a full 12 months, actually. And so we had to build up a fence and to keep the soil from falling out. But we actually kept the tree at a pretty steep angle for a full year before we repotted it. So you can grow trees a little bit crooked. Yes?
Yes, Jonas. Is this technique specific to just the Dupuich, or can you do the same thing with a Prostrata or a Kishu or a Nana? Does this one grow faster than others, or are there some that have restrictions?
So pretty much the basic principles we talked about apply to every species of bonsai. They're more relevant to junipers, and they apply more or less equally to all junipers. Is that you've got to consider a lot of different things when you're working on the trees. You've got to consider the roots in the lifeline, how the trees respond to being cut back really hard. And I would make different recommendations for different species in terms of when to work on them or how much work to do or what the follow-up care might be. But yeah, all the basic principles are definitely apply to all junipers and to some degree all bonsai. Yeah.
Just to follow up then, what time of year did you work on this?
Let's see.
Excellent question.
This was probably in January, which would be the perfect time to repot a juniper. The way I go about my repotting is I've got too many conifers, meaning I don't have time to get to them all. And so you're a little more flexible with when you can repot conifers in spring. I know there's not a lot of deciduous, but the way I do it in my garden is I just start repotting conifers, and I just do that every single day. And then as soon as I see a deciduous tree starting to bud out, I drop what I'm doing, repot the deciduous tree that's growing, and I get back to the conifers. Oh, budget moving on that maple, I repot the maple, then I get back to the conifers. And I do the junipers last of everything because they don't care as much. And so I tell 100% of my students where I live up in Northern California that I want to be done repotting with everything in mid-March. And I guarantee I'll be repotting junipers in April every year. And you can also repot junipers, at least up north, in fall. They care a little less about when they're repotted. So September is not an uncommon time to repot them. Wouldn't do that down here because it's still baking at that point. I wanted to start by just showing some live versions of what we were looking at. Matthew Galacio brought in a few trees for us today, and we have a healthy whip. This is what you want your starting points to look like. It's a whip because of obvious reasons, and it's perfectly flexible, and we can get great bends at any point along the trunk here. Perfect starting point. After this has been wired and has grown for a year, you will end up with something that looks like this. Oh, again, you got white background and something back there. Green on green. And so I don't know if you're getting close enough to see the curves in there. But this is what a tree will look like about a year after doing that initial work. And some of you might notice that it's kind of straight down at the bottom. Not super important if you can't see that. Yeah. And so it still can be bent at this point, or you don't worry about it, or you just think if you're doing a batch of a dozen trees, maybe you wire it a little differently so you can get twist down to the very bottom. Now, fast forward several years and you will have something that looks like this. And this looks really, really similar to that tree that we started with in that last before and after. Now, does that mean that we can turn this into that all in one day? It'd be a very different style, but you can turn it into something. But again, this is, remember, what success looks like. So if you're thinking about what you want your bonsai practice to look like or what the hobby is going to mean to you, do you want to spend 8 years turning this into this? Or do you want to spend 8 years turning this into those slides we saw in the front? If you're young, go for all 16 years. If not, I'd say do the type of work you enjoy doing. A lot of my friends with the absolute best collections I know of in the US love working with young materials. And so they're sprouting stuff from seed, they're bending whips, they're doing this because they love working. Because it's fun to grow trees at different stages of development. So it's less about how old you are and more about what is fun. The whole point of bonsai as a hobby is to move the hands on the clock forward. Then it doesn't really matter how you're going about that. And so, but this is what the process is going to look like. And today we are going to go through the process with a couple of young trees. And so these are the young trees we're going to be working on right here. I'm not even going to pretend those are going to stand up. And we'll talk through some different ways to approach that. But before we do that, I'm going to teach you how you can practice this on your own. How many of you think you might be curious to try this at some point with junipers or some other species? Great. So here's what you can do to practice. If you think this is easy, make a whip out of a piece of wire and then bend it.
What gauge is that?
Oh, I'm only using way heavier gauge than you should practice with because I want you to be able to see it on the camera. But pretty much anything you can see will work for that. I'm going to say this is either 5.5 or 6. This is a pretty good size wire right there. And I can see it's kind of showing up right here. Who wants to try their hand at bending this? Oh, I've got one. You're going to do your own tree. You're going to come up later. Yeah. So we'll get Miles there. You're an old pro. If we need an old pro, we'll get Gary to do it. You want to give it a try?
Sure. Let me give it a try. Go ahead.
Okay.
Both of us.
Oh, I'm giving you a piece of wire too, right?
Sure.
Okay, so your names are?
I'm Bob.
Bob and? Mike. Bob and Mike.
Bob and Mike.
And so if I give you no instructions whatsoever, other than give me something that will grow into a compelling Shohin trunk. You saw pictures of what they look like. Let's just see what you're going to end up with.
Today's show.
I should have given them skinnier wire to notice how hard they're working on this. Because if you think it's hard with no tree in there, because this is about the size you'll need to bend some of those trees we were looking at.
I'm doing a cascade.
Well, we'll start. Bob, right? Bob. Kind of looks like it's a little bit of a tree. You got a trunk in a tree. You can be a graphic designer. All right. So if you were to grade yourself, what would your criteria be for assigning a grade? How do you decide if you, like, what grade would you give yourself? Did you do an A on this? You get a B, you get an F, you flunk it out?
B, F, C.
So, and why was this not an A?
Because I have no idea what I'm doing.
So, audience, what might be
Totally.
what might be a more informed approach to creating a line for a Cascade bonsai? More curves.
More curves.
More depth.
More depth. Notice how it has a nice shape when we look from the front, and notice how it's a perfectly straight line from the side.
Okay.
Take two.
Take two.
While Bob's doing that, we'll look at Mike's.
Mike the man man.
Right, now. So, how do you grade yourself? We'll see if modesty kicks in or not.
A B.
And what would have made it better?
This line is kind of straight right here. But that's time. Maybe I would probably get that straight line out of there and maybe this one change a little bit to break that up a little bit too. But yeah, I like that.
What do you all think? Is that worth a good solid B plus?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I think that's fine. Now, one thing I will say about this, how thick do you want the trunk to get?
About this thick.
So, if the trunk is 2 3/4 inches in diameter, how effective is this movement? It's just going to go, and it'll look totally straight. So one thing to consider when you're bending these is you're actually selecting the diameter of the trunk when you're setting your curves. Now, I know you don't want a Shohin to be as thick as your arm.
Yeah.
But if it's a Shohin, how thick would you want that to be?
Probably like ranging is bigger than my thumb to this small up here.
And so some kind of taper. If you taper it down to very small up here, we can't make any of the deadwood features we saw up there where they were starting with 2 inches of wood and then carving them into these slender fins that went through space. Here's how you can kind of tell if your curves are too small or too big, because when you're working at home, unless there's something I don't know about, I won't be there to ask you these same questions. What you're going to do is say, what is the distance between the wire? And if there's a 1/2 inch gap between the 2 curves in a wire, that means that it can only thicken to 1/4 inch. And by the time it hits 1/4 inch, those two are already touching each other. Some touching is fine, but we're actually determining the thickness we're going to let something grow to when doing this. So maybe that's an amazing gin, and your trunk is down here, and some other bends are going to go down there. So if I were to give you another piece, and I'll be merciful and make it a little bit more slender, and say, in light of that comment, would you do anything differently? Whereas Bob, let's see, what did you come up with?
That's the trunk.
And so is the trunk going to go up and then grow in one direction and then come back in the other direction on itself?
Which way did that go?
So
Yeah.
I'm the soil right here. So this is the soil right here.
Yeah, it's going to go up and then curve around, then I'll allow that to create a cascade.
Exactly. So now we have a 3-dimensional shape. So you get a full letter grade higher than that. Now, so, well, we won't give you Fs. That's messed up. I mean, they didn't have Fs anymore. But let's say if you had a D before, this could be a C right now. And so the kinds of questions I ask when I see this kind of shape is, what would make a trunk grow one direction in nature and then make it change its mind and grow in the exact opposite direction? Like I said, every tree has a story. I don't really care what it is, but it has to be a good story.
We were somewhere where there were seasonal winds.
Seasonal winds, and for 5 years it seasonally goes that way. And so we use natural forces as a way to start thinking about it. Maybe I'm just potting it at the wrong angle and it's my fault. Maybe if we potted it like this, the trunk kind of has a zig and a zag before it kind of comes back down. And then you can tell a story of it was just kind of going up, and then over time it responded to natural forces, snow loads in winter, that created more of a cascade form. So I think your grade just went up by me not making a mistake in potting it bad. And just FYI, please, all of you, never plant a trunk straight up and down in a pot, ever, under any circumstance, ever, unless you're making a formal upright bonsai, and you're not making a formal upright bonsai, so never do it. I only say that because it's hard. I've probably started thousands of trees over the years, and I've made 0 successful formal upright bonsai. Please prove me wrong and make a good one, but good luck. Now, so if we're getting this up into the B- range, what would make it a higher grade?
Well, obviously the angle, but, let's see.
A couple things come to mind.
Well, we bring this out more this way.
Yeah, and so bend it out or grow it out?
Just bend it out a little bit. Maybe.
Do you all have suggestions? What all would bump this up a grade? Yes, Eric?
I think the radiuses are all too similar in diameter.
Yeah, when you have like the loop of this curve is really similar to the loop of that curve and that curve. So the radiuses are similar. And so in other words, like it's a similar kind of curve. They're oriented very differently and the space between them is good. But I'd say the shape of that curve is pretty darn similar in all three of the major curves. So yeah, we could vary the curves. What's another thing?
If you left it like that, what would happen?
Well, you would grow so depending on how big you want it, this could support a much bigger trunk. So for a field-grown tree, this could be a really good size. Because if you did get to that, say 2.5 inches, the trunk could come up, come down, come around. And that actually would be, I think as a large tree, that could get into the B+ range, maybe even higher on there. This looks really simple. And the only thing I would say is we might be able to make a little more wiggling here and there. I don't like that these lines are so parallel. However, homework for you all, go find a tree that you love and take a piece of wire, a slender piece, and trace it along the line of the trunk and then evaluate the shape of the trunk in the abstract. And you might learn that it's a very simple shape compared to what you thought it was. If this had twists all the way around it, that would be an actually fantastic shape for a big tree. But we were doing Shohin today, and so Mike has given us a good Shohin option. Let's see what your second Shohin looks like. Yeah, we can get that. We can get that to just right about 20 centimeters there. So, how do you grade yourself on this one?
I think less than my first one.
And why is that?
I think this is too normal of a curve for the whole structure. I think I need to change something in that to like change that a little bit.
To make it travel through space a little more. Are you copying Mike's test? The only thing I noticed about this one is it's the same comment, I forget which one of you made it, about one of the trees or sample wires that we did, where the distance between the crests and the troughs is almost identical on all of these. So it's as if it's any one given section looks great, but it's following a very simple line. So fix it. And so when you have people who are real beginners, you often start with people who say, well, I know straight's bad, and I know the curves should be bigger lower on the tree, and they should get smaller up on top. It's our basic course to find. And so you say, great, I did it right. And you say, no, it's two-dimensional, kind of as we talked about. And then people will come in and make a couple of twists, and they'll say, look, it's not two-dimensional. You're like, right, but now it's a perfect S-curve. And you're like, well, I don't want it to be a perfect S-curve. And so you make a couple other tweaks. And then at this point, your hands are getting sore, and it looks even stupider. And you're like, wait, now the trunk can't get thick. And you start realizing, this is a really valuable exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
Mike's already finding it's getting harder than rather than easier. And so, if we were to ask, because Bob gave us a big tree, I'm sorry I'm going through all your wire, I'll try to keep it. If we were going to ask you to make a Shohin juniper, a small tree that's only going to be 8 inches tall, that's your last assignment for right now.
Last assignment.
Yeah. And so, again, I highly recommend this. If you are trying to grow bigger trees, oh, I forgot to bring in newspapers. Does anyone happen to have a newspaper we can throw away today? Everyone reads the newspaper still, right? I don't want to crumple up an iPad. Here is something else you can do. To figure out how sharp a curve has to be based on a given thickness of the trunk. If you want a trunk that is a mere 1.25 inches, oh that was 2 pieces of wire. If you want something that's about, somewhere around 1.5 inches, crumple up newspapers, use a towel, and then start realizing as you twist, you can now measure your twist and see how big the curves have to be based on the thickness of the trunk that you're working with. And so you might say, you know what, maybe this is going to be a good start to a Shohin, something like this. And so you can kind of create these models where you can mock up a trunk. And then what you realize is, wow, if I were to reverse engineer that curve following my own advice, you'll find that that is a very, very simple curve. So if I literally pick the one piece of wire that's broken in the middle, which will reinforce the trunk. You don't want the trunk to break in the middle of a demo. I've seen it. It happens. Well, it's like I didn't do it. So if you start at the base, that got kind of boring. Let's add some twists in there. And so if you just follow and trace the line of the trunk, for one hand, it turns out. And then if we can extract it, you end up with something like this. And so, yeah, it's fairly two-dimensional, that's fixable. But notice how at the base there was very little going on. And in a lot of those examples we saw, sometimes there was no movement at the base, but there might have been some twist. Or sometimes maybe there was twist, but not a lot of movement. But notice how we have bigger features down low and then smaller, but very irregular shape it ended up with. And so the kind of whole point of why we're doing this today is not to show an amazing before and after transformation. It's to kind of give you practical tools for making your trees more attractive. And these are things that are cheap and easy. Let's see how Bob's... Oh, did you recopy me again?
I wasn't watching.
Yeah, how do you grade Bob on this new one here? We'll pretend that's a genetic twisting. We'll give a little point on there. I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, just slanting just a little bit and then...
We'll be auctioning these off later. And so what's funny is the guy that taught me this is, actually both of those are pretty fantastic. Are you still catching up with your... Okay, how many times did the trunk die because you cracked it back and forth? This is why we practice with wire. And if you think this is hard, try it with copper, where it gets harder and harder as you do it. But I'd say we have two apps. I wouldn't change either. These are great. But did you learn a little something to think about for next time? Everybody, Bob and Mike. Yeah, I think these are both great starting points. But I was taking a tour to Japan once, and actually the same guy that saw me, he's been a good friend of mine for 25 years now. And he was going to give me a tour around his hometown down in Kyushu. And what he had said was, you've seen a lot of beautiful gardens, you've been to the big shows. I'm not going to take you to my best customers with the prettiest trees. I'm going to take you to the gardens where people make bonsai. And so what he did is he prepared a tour, and we went to the home of the person who made the absolute best trunks of anyone he knew. And then the person who made the best branches, or the best deciduous trees. And it was the guy that made the best pine trunks that started grabbing a bunch of newspapers and started mocking it up. And then he showed me how to reverse engineer the curves. And then he said, make a paper mache model once you're happy with your trunk. And he literally pointed up on the shelf, and there was a paper mache trunk on the top of his cabinets. And the guy did amazing work. This is a guy who could take a colander this big and make a trunk this thick in it. And it was literally an inch of soil around the sides and a trunk this big. And it had sacrifice branches 10 feet long. And he gave me a very interesting tip. And he said, in Japan, we're a very small country, so our gardens are very crowded. All of our sacrifice branches grow straight up. But that shades out the branches down below. That's no good. He said, America's a big country. You have more space. Grow your sacrifice branches out to the side so that you don't shade out down below. I didn't have the heart to tell him how many trees I've crammed in my backyard, and I'm now growing all my sacrifice branches just like he did, because I also don't have any space. So now I'm going to ask for two specific volunteers named Stephen and Miles. So here's Stephen. Oh, all the way in the back. Oh, I had to wait them up. I'm so sorry.
Should I grab my tools?
No, you don't need tools. You need good luck.
Good luck.
And so these are starts from Bonsai, are provided these for the session, and Stephen and Miles have both signed up to get some of these ahead of time. And Stephen had no idea he'd be coming up here. Miles was chomping at the bit for this. And so we're all three with these three trees going to go through the exercise that we all now know how to do perfectly.
Right. Right.
Your job is to essentially put on one piece of wire and make it interesting without, I won't even jinx it, without unduly putting strain on the tree. And so what size wire would you want to put some interesting bends in there?
Not the 6, right?
No, probably not the big one. How do you tell what size wire? So Miles is brand spanking new. This is his first actual meeting, by the way. Of course, he was up on stage helping me 2 weeks ago, but that was his first time in the room with the club. But this is the first actual meeting. And Stephen, how long have you been doing bonsai?
4 years.
So we have so between 4 years and 0, we have a combination of 4 years of experience right here. So then I'll ask Stephen, how do you know what size wire you want to put on this one wire we're going to do today?
1/3 the diameter of the branch.
So 1/3 the diameter of the branch is a good starting point when you have no other cues to go on. What I will do is actually grab the part of the trunk I want to bend and feel, is it stiff or is it flexible? And we talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago, where you can have a contest. Well, it does you no good because you haven't memorized what stiffness equates to what size wire. But you can cheat, do a little contest between the wire and the branch. If I isolate one branch and one piece of wire that are about the same size, I can cross the two, and one's going to win, one's going to lose. This wire is plenty strong enough to bend from this size right here. Now, if I have that same competition on something a little bit thicker down here, let's see, who's going to win? The tree, the branch, or the wire?
Branch.
The branch wins. So this is not thick enough. And so if I get a thicker piece of wire, a couple gauges up higher, it's got a 3.0, who's going to win this one?
Wire.
And so, depending on how you hold it, this is just kind of, I don't recommend doing this all the time, but it's one way to kind of home in on when you're figuring it out, whether or not it's strong enough to get it bent. Now you can always cheat. If you put the wire right next to your fingers, the wire is always going to win because over such a short distance you have tons of leverage on your hand. Whereas if you hold it way far out on the tree is always going to bend, but it'll be a big slow curve. So based on what kind of bend you want to do, you can literally just kind of decide this is overkill for this, but then down below at the base of the trunk, the tree wins and the wire loses. So I need something heavier than this if I want to bend all the way down to the base. So, based on your trees, let's start with Stephen. I guess we get a little close up with what's going on down here. Can you pick away all of those little tiny shoots just right there real quick? And I'll also do the same. And we're doing what we'll think of as wiring prep, which is just make room for the wire to get in there. I don't actually want to cut off branches, but I do want to make sure that I can get the connection between the wire and the tree fairly snug. There's a lot of little just things coming out of there. I'm going to cut one of those off. So cutting if anyone wants to start a Juniper. And let's pull a little bit of those guys off. How's yours looking?
I don't know.
How would you know? You've done this before all of 0 times?
I've watched some videos.
Oh, he's armed with YouTube. It's on. And actually, the guy who grew these, Eric Schrader, has a fantastic YouTube channel at Bonsai. And he actually shows every single step of the process online. He even has an online course just on how to make Shohin junipers from rooting and cutting all the way through show. It's fantastic. program. Which of these do you want to be the main line that you're going to wire? And probably because it's the biggest one?
Well, it's got a lot of shape in it. It's got a lot of curves and, yeah.
What he's not telling you is that the reason he's choosing the one that already has curves on it is it means he doesn't have to bend the heavy part. Eric has pre-wired these because the whole goal is he wants to provide something that gives you a good starting point. And so your first bend is going to be right in this area, so you're going to want a wire that's big enough to put a little bit of a bend on that, which might be around this size. Should we test it? So we can get a little bit of a bend on there with this. Do you want to go heavier than that? Let's see what else we have to choose from. Yeah, maybe something like that. And then what you can do is wire one piece of wire out to about right there. Or actually maybe just wire those two branches to each other.
Yeah.
And I'll save you the thinking part, and we'll just give you a nice, generous piece to work with. And now I'll be doing it with you, so we'll start all at the same time. Okay, Miles, how big is your branches? Ooh, you went a little aggressive on the pulling out the shoots.
Yeah.
But I gave you zero guidance, so that's on me. Luckily, it'll cause no problem at all. It'll be better for the camera. You're just thinking of the audience. That's good. So we're going to have you, you'll be able to get one wire all the way up in there. Do you want to decide from scratch what size wire to use? We've got a whole bunch of different sizes out here. I'll do the same with mine. And I think this will be possibly raffled off later. Yes, no? If no one says no, maybe it will be. Yeah. We'll find out soon. We'll just leave that at maybe right now.
Hey, Matt, can we get a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Are we raffling this tree? Yeah, are we raffling this tree?
Is this a yes or no on the raffle?
Yeah.
One of them I'll hold for the raffle. There's two extra ones. One I'll hold for a raffle, one I'll hold for a follow.
Okay.
So go ahead, use it.
Great.
I think that was a yes.
I just need to know if I'm going to tell everyone that they need to get really excited about the amazing work that's about to go into this.
I kind of like the movement over down here, so I'm inclined to think that I really want to start moving the trunk up here.
So if you didn't hear that, what he's saying is he likes the movement down low, but Miles wanted to put more movement up a little bit higher. The thickness is pretty similar, and so what size wire do you think to put a bend in there?
I'm thinking something like this. I don't know, is this like 5, maybe a little thicker?
I would always recommend if you're between two sizes on young trees like this, if you want to make sure you have enough, go a little bit more than you think.
Okay, just like that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that right there. 1, 2, 3, go. So here's the most important thing when doing this is how you start the wire. And I'll say this is not straightforward, and we'll walk through what it will be for all of us. The one I'm working on has two lines that are about the same thickness, and so I'm going to wire those two branches to each other. And if we're going to zoom in on those two branches, you have three options for how to start the wire. You can either start the wire right in the middle at the base of two branches. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. We can start it on the other side, or we can start it in the middle. You're going to either choose the front or the back. You're not going to do it this way because this is not as secure. So whenever you're pairing branches, always try to start at one end of the Y or the other end of the Y. And so that's the way I'm going to start mine. Now, for Miles's Juniper, there's one heavier line and one really slender one that's really flexible. This will not provide a good anchor to the other side, so we're going to start it a different way. And we're going to just take the wire and insert it into the soil right at the base of the trunk. And it's kind of loose in there, so what I'm going to do is I'll have to just provide commentary. Because when you're watching a baseball game on the radio, is just find a way to stick the wire right next to the trunk, kind of at the base down there, and then ideally, you actually can poke it through the side of the container. We might even be able to do that. This may or may not be a good idea. I have no idea. I know it's going to be possible to make a hole. Whether or not we can find that with the wires, a totally different story.
Stick it up from the bottom.
Yeah, if we have to, we can stick it up from the bottom. Mostly, I'm just curious if this will even work. I need to make the hole a lot bigger for that. I think I just smashed it. Oh, but it actually does kind of stop right there. So if
No, it's right there. We're right there.
Oh, it is. Oh, we're
Yeah.
great. Now move your fingers out of the way. Oh, cool.
Almost.
It'll work. It'll work.
Where'd it go?
Oh, the trunk is moving out of the way. There we go. Ta-da! Great. And then you can just put a little crimp on it and it will... It's one more point of stability so that as you come around... Okay, so we'll say that's your starting point is right like that. So even though I know that was really hard to see, the idea is that we just passed the wire past the base of the trunk and then stuck it out of the side of the pot, and in that way it can kind of hold it so we have some anchoring at the base of the wire. So Steve, you've been doing this 4 years, you tell me, how are you going to start that one? And you're going to wire these two to each other?
Yeah.
And how do you choose this side instead of the other side? Oh, because that's the way you want to twist it.
Yeah, this way and that way.
So this is a fancy answer. He knows which way he wants to twist the branches, and so he chose to start on one side rather than the other, so he can get that would be counterclockwise movement on the branch he wanted to move counterclockwise, clockwise on the branch he wants to move clockwise. So that sounds perfect. So let's watch you go. Let's see you start. Let's see how it looks.
Heavy wire.
It is heavy wire. So when it's heavier wire, it means if you're right-handed, your left hand does all the work, and your right hand, you just hold it further out, and that way you get lots of leverage. It's the left hand that you really struggle with. And we're only going to do one loop on each side right now, because it's that first loop that matters more than all the others. Because it's usually the bottom is always the thickest part, and if you don't have the wire firmly attached, you don't have as much control about how you're going to wire the branch. Okay, doing the other side now. And so Miles is staring and finding out, is this working, is this not working, is this what I want to copy, is this not what I want to copy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm wondering, it looks like you set me up to wrap both of them.
You're going to go around underneath that one.
Around, oh, okay.
Yeah, so it'll be just a little bit lower and then around on the second trunk. Okay, you got one loop on each side? Yeah. Let's take a look. So before we go any further, we're going to look and check and see if there are any gaps anywhere along there. And I don't see any gaps at all. So that is a perfect starting point. This next curve will be probably the hardest one. It gets a little easier out until it gets really skinny and it gets hard again. Some tricks are to get this next curve in, you pinch as hard as you can with your holding hand, and then when you're holding it further out, I'm not holding it in close. A lot of people hold wire in close. It just takes way too much energy to do that, whereas you get more leverage out here. If you kind of wiggle the thing into place a little bit, you can move it around, and rather, if I want to coil right there, I get one little thing out of the way, we can actually hold it way out here, and by just doing a little wiggle and a twist, we can actually get it to come right where we want into place like that, and we've just added a half coil. I can keep my hand here, do the same kind of thing, where I just kind of gently curve it onto the branch, and it's not pinching too tight, and now we've added a curve and a curve. And now you just do that a few more times. As the branch gets skinnier, it gets harder and harder. All right, let's see what it's going to take to get onto the base of that trunk. Ask any questions you want.
Yeah, I'm scared. So
what do you tell people who are scared? How do you encourage them?
Don't worry about it.
Do it anyway?
So like, I'm afraid of just ripping this thing to shreds.
Good.
Because I'm reaching in here and I'm like, I don't really even know what I'm working with here. Like, I'm trying to feel around.
So want me to show you one curve and then you can do the next one?
Just at the bottom where I'm, yeah. where I'm,
And so there's a couple fears. Is starting is the most important point, and I just said to leave no gaps at the base. And rather than connecting two branches, which takes more finger strength, but is pretty simple to understand, this one is just kind of a fixed loosey-goosey down at the bottom. So the way you protect the roots is by getting your fingers, and we can just cut this down a little bit, make it easier to see.
that is amazing.
I made him do it without doing this, and so let's make it a little easier for you all to see. This is a lot harder with terracotta containers. Either that or I lack the technique. And then not having to hold it helps. And now you can see that we have this right against that root right there. And so if I put one finger on the back and one, are you right-handed?
Yeah.
You were like 2 weeks ago, I remember, so. And so if I use these two to pinch, we can make that first coil come right around the trunk, just like that. And so in that case, I held it pretty close, but I used my thumb as kind of a fulcrum. I bent it around my thumb right to there. And now we can use our fingers to just kind of gently move the branch to the other side, very deliberately.
Got it.
And then we can reach from underneath on this side, use our fingers to flip the other side around, and we'll do the exact same thing one more time. So see, I'm kind of cheating, and now I can do that kind of wiggling trick where I kind of bring it around, and I'm going to make that curve ahead of time and just kind of lay the curve right into place like that. And now you can come up here and pinch a little bit higher and kind of work your way up. Yeah, that's kind of right where you want to be.
And so now I'm pinching a little higher. Like,
Yeah, and feel free to set it down on the table. It makes it easier.
Yeah.
How's yours doing, Steven? Looks great. It's really hard with heavy wiring on a skinny branch. So he's actually, Steven's doing a fantastic job on that, by the way. I'll cut mine down. Mine's set up like Steven's, where this one happens to have a much shorter, heavy section of the branch, and then it gets really slender.
Gosh. It's so thick.
It's hard to learn what size wire to select until you've done it.
We definitely don't want to pinch our little juniper shoots with the wire, right?
If so, there's a lot of little tiny fuzzy things, the tiny shoots, you can just pull them out.
Okay, which I just did before even waiting for your answer.
Yes, yeah, because it's kind of obvious. There's kind of no other thing you can do right there.
I tried to do this on a Monterey cypress that I have at home, and I did not do this well. Not that I'm killing it right now, but...
Well, and that's why it's good to start out with very modest trees that you don't mind experimenting with. If you want to learn how to wire, you need to buy trees that have trunks and branches that need wiring. That sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people buy little tiny things like this. They want to learn detail wiring and styling. You can learn to put on 1 or 2 wires with a tree like this, and that's it. And the reason we're doing a few of these is just like we talked about, the benefit of doing these in batches is that you get to have different ways to do it. Now, here's one trick that they have not taken advantage of yet, which is you can always cheat and use pliers to apply additional leverage when that helps. That can be handy in tight spaces or at the very end of the wire when you need a little additional leverage. And so, I don't know, you all tell me, I know watching people wire is usually not the most interesting thing in the world. Is watching 3 people not being able to see what's happening any better or worse? I don't know.
3 times or 1/3.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, let's see. So, how would you grade Miles's work? Let's ask how Miles would grade it. Hasn't been yet, just wrapped.
I think maybe like a B.
Because?
Like it's making pretty good contact. I think that's pretty important. There's a little bit of daylight here and there, like
that's fine.
But my spacing was like not perfectly consistent. I kind of widened it out a little right here.
Yeah, so you'll notice that the coils are pretty tight on the first section, and then they loosen up a little bit on the second. Is that good or bad?
I think it's great.
What's the criteria for knowing whether it's good or bad, Eric?
The higher the coils, the more bend you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. A lot of people teach just do a certain angle of spiral, and that's all that matters. Just to mark that up where you can see it a little better. Try to wind it around my fingers. Now this only works with clean wire. Where's my? This will work well. As this lesson bears repeating. I'll do a massive exaggeration. So the first several coils there's quite a bit of space between them, right? And then there's a lot of space here and there's almost no space at all there. A lot of people will say just find the exact kind of spacing like that and make them all exactly the same. On a given line, it typically should be consistent. However, the way you determine what that line should be is how many bends you want to do. If you're setting branches on a branch pad, you can go with fairly spaced out, you can be around that 60 degrees, somewhere in that ballpark. The 45 we'll see in a lot of the old textbooks is a little bit too tight. And so this might be totally fine. It might even be stretched out as far as this. If you're not doing a lot of heavy bending and just supporting a branch and or putting gentle curves in it, you can really space out those coils. But if you're about to do crazy movement on something, you need to tighten those coils up. And so this would actually support a tighter bend down low and a little less of a bend up above at some theoretical level. But they're both within tolerance. In general, I'd say that is a good angle to work with, what you did up on the top. But since you're going to do a tighter turn down below, I think it happens to be appropriate right there.
Cool.
So, Stephen, how do you grade yourself?
Well, I got to the very fine stuff, and this wire was just too heavy. I was afraid I was going to break the branch.
And so Stephen did the right thing and stopped. Yeah. And so here's what we're going to do in this case. We're going to cut it off where it became unruly. And now you're going to use that bit of wire as an anchor point to wire these two branches to each other with a smaller piece of wire. Let me hand you a piece of wire for that. And it won't be as thick as that last one was. Yes, question. If that's too thick, we can give you a smaller one. This might be more appropriate.
On these little trees, and on your first bend where you're doing maybe down to the bottom where you want to create some bend, would you protect the trunk with something like maybe litter tube or?
At this stage, I would not protect the trunk because probably most of the trunk will end up being dead wood.
Okay.
And so it doesn't matter as much. Well, I've done this with young pines, young junipers, young conifers in general. You're not worried about protecting the trunk. Now, you have to make sure it's not too tight. You don't want it to cut in because if you're going to use that part of the lifeline, you don't want wire scars right there. Some people let the wire bite in on purpose. I'm not a fan of that approach. Oh, so Stephen's now wondering, how do you start? Let's see if we can zoom in and find it, and I can show exactly how to start this. And this is anchoring 101. And I don't know that there's a lot of 101 teaching, but what's cool is we're going to do the exact same thing. In fact, let's make it super clear. Can you all see this? This is the area we're looking at.
Yep.
There are two ways to start at a Y. We're either going to start the wire in front or in back. And there is a very definite right answer and a wrong answer.
And back.
Because
It comes around with this wire.
we don't want the two wires to cross. And so what you're going to do is just, because these two branches are about the same length, we're going to start in the back, and we're going to use our hand that supports it. And the first thing we're going to do is follow the wire that's already there. And so the first curve will just come right up next to that guy, kind of like that. And then we can do the same thing with this one in the opposite direction. And now we've got it started, and you're going to do the exact same wiring. You're going to go out as far as you can there and as far as you can there. By passing this wire for 1.5 loops, we're going to add another twist on there. This provides what we call an anchor. If you just wire two branches together, if you move one, the other one's going to wobble around. But if one wire follows the other wire, then that will prevent the two. See, like right now, these two are kind of wobbling around to each other. But if we get it snug and follow that in there, we will get much less of that. And if we have heavier branches, we'll get literally 0 of that.
Jonas, quick question.
Yes.
Would you happen to know why those liners are in such deep growing containers?
Probably because Eric had them laying around. So there's 2 reasons the nursery industry uses these deep pots. Is it allows you to have more root space but still jam a bunch of trees together, and there's these flats they make for these, and it's a way to be really compact in your growing. Eric also uses them when he's making exposed root starts, and so that's another approach you can do, which is you can train all these roots and then shape them all out, do a root over rock, do an exposed root, something like that. I don't know why specifically for the junipers. I'm just guessing it's because he had them and you get the volume you need, but you can still put trees really close to each other. Because you just want them to grow up. You just want a tall, skinny whip at that point. So we're almost ready to bend that. That one's ready to bend. Now let's see, is there a second wire we can put on here? I think you need to do a second wire.
Yeah.
Let's wire that one too.
I've noticed that Eric, in his demos online, often removes the plant from the container for easier manipulation. Do you think there's an advantage to that?
So if you're working at it, if it's a time of year when you can safely repot and the tree is very, very young, you can do it without undue stress to the tree. Depending on how close or far from the ocean Miles and Stephen live, next week might be in the 70s or in the 80s, and so I probably would not recommend doing it. Now, they're junipers, they'd probably be fine, but yeah, when you're doing production work for lots of trees, it makes it really easy to wire them outside of the pot. The main reason I like wiring them out of the pot is it allows you to get curves right at the base of the trunk, right near the roots. Sometimes there's a soil level here, and then the trunk goes down, and the roots emerge way down there. If you start wiring from up here, you're going to have that straight section. If you take it out of the pot, that soil will fall away, and you can get those bends right where you want them. Now, it's also easier to manhandle the roots, but again, when they're young, you can get away with that.
Thank you.
Up to you if you want to do a third one. I think there's no reason not to at this point.
I've got this cool stuff right here. Can I use this as my anchor point, or would you go around the trunk right here?
So where do we start it? Do we start it on a root that's sticking out right there, or do we just anchor it to, there's a branch that was cut back. It is just a little deadwood feature down there. Do we start it at a deadwood feature kind of on the ground, or do we anchor it to the trunk? Or does it matter? Why the trunk?
It's just more stable.
It's a little bigger than that, and so it is a little more stable. The other thing is you can see it better. So there'll be 2 pros. You can get to it and see it easily. Also, you can get enough overlap to make sure that there's no teetering or tottering. So there's 3 good reasons why the trunk would be good. The only reason not to do the trunk is to avoid additional wire on the trunk, which is additional scrawling and doesn't look as good. The reason I would do the trunk is because it'll be better practice, and practice is the more important thing right now.
So,
But yes, that would work. If you did not have that option, you could hook it around the base of that, come around the base of that, and then come up, and that would work totally fine. Okay.
so, and I'm wondering, how do
you do this?
How am I approaching the wiring to the trunk? Yeah.
So I'll hold this and so try to interpret what you're looking at as a Y between two branches.
Okay.
So where's the Y?
Right here.
Exactly. And do you start in the middle of the Y or on either side of the Y? Just hold the wire up to the Y and then see what makes sense.
I mean, I'm inclined to think through.
And that's the one thing we don't want to do.
No.
And the reason we don't want to do that is you can get the wire a little bit lower and you get more support at the very base of the branch.
Okay.
When you go in the middle, it's by default. So now if you do it that way, is it going to go with the wire or across the wire? Here's a way to answer that question. And this is the last kind of cheater technique we'll go through today. You can do a test wire. You just take a really skinny piece of wire and just start wrapping it and see if it's going to cross the wire or follow it. So ignore this side, you know that's fine. So start winding it on that right side and see if it crosses.
Oh, then that crosses.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So start on the other side.
Starting it over here,
then you can
we're
follow
following that, and then this is going up that way.
Exactly. So if you needed to spiral the opposite direction, maybe you could hook it on that root, another way to do that.
Okay.
But again, because it's good practice, we're going to try anchoring it to that wire.
Okay.
And now you know what side you have to start it on.
So I can go like that, and I'm going to do this one first.
Yeah, do about 2 full turns and try to make it touching that wire.
Jonas,
Okay.
question.
Yes.
And, whether we wire to the trunk or to the stump.
Yeah.
Would the answer have changed if we were using copper wire?
No. It's just what can you get to, what's going to provide the stability you need, what looks better. Those are your basic criteria there. Will you wire one at mine?
This one I did a different way. I started in the ground and came up and anchored around the trunk, and then came up behind and did that. So, let's see, I started right here, and I brought it up around the trunk, and up and over, and then around the branches this way.
So this one, so that's using that same anchoring technique used over there, where you put it down there. As long as you get a wrap around the trunk, it'll provide good stability here. If it just comes straight up out of the ground and onto the branch, it doesn't give good stability. This is about 1 complete turnaround. Ideally, a turn and a half would give a little more security. What you don't want is the ability to be able to just pull the branch down and tear it away from the trunk. Now, we don't really need this branch. These are the 2 I care about in this case, just because of how it comes out down there. So that'll be perfectly fine in this case. And then we can shorten the wires. Actually, we'll leave them one for now. I just asked you to put on a little more wire for me, but you're going to not sheet and go into the ground. You're going to put a wire right next to that wire, and you're going to wire this branch to the tip of that one. And I know it's 12:30. How much longer until you want us to wrap this up?
25 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, we got time. Okay.
Usually one.
Okay, great. We got plenty of time. And feel free to interrupt with questions while we're almost done with the wiring, and then we'll do the bending. It was so much easier when all we had to do was just bend the wire, wasn't it? So let's get the camera over here. So when you start a second wire that's going to sister up against the others, it's always so much easier to start at the base rather than one side. Otherwise, this has to come around. Now, it probably started there, and then you just kind of slip as you're working on it. But you always want to start at the base and keep that secured while you put your loop on it. If you don't start at the base, it almost doesn't matter how you do it. It ends up being a lot of work. So I'll show what that would look like. So you provided a great example for us. So we'll make this side face the camera. And so we can actually, I want to cut that little knob out of there. Of course, my hand's right in the way. There we go. So if we're going to start right at the base right here, we will start right here, and then we can just follow right along the wire like that. And then I will anchor it here and follow right along like this. Now here's how I keep this in check. Notice how, and I don't know if this is too small, notice how the small wire is below the big one? When the wire disappears behind the branch, that means I need to be below the next curve of wire, and that's how I know where I need to wrap it. And you just kind of keep following out from there. Once I have a turn and a half on each side, then I can just pick any one side. And because I start on the bottom, I know that every time it'll have to come around on the bottom. And then you can go all the way out there, and then I will come back and do the same thing. Oh, except we wanted to go on to this one, that's right. And now I think you can finish wiring that just like you did the other ones.
So I'm getting to the next question.
Oh, question, yeah.
So you told us about how to pick the wire, where to start. How about choosing the direction of rotation? I know you talked about
That's literally the next thing we're going to talk
which
about.
branch you're going to bend, where they're going to bend it. Does it matter which direction you're going to bend it?
Yes.
Because you've already picked it.
So for a tree like this, it has, so a tree that's never been worked on, does it matter which way we spiral the wire? It doesn't matter. We can do it either way on a tree that's never been worked on. But if we want the wire to go, or if we want the branch to go in a specific direction, then we will choose a specific coiling. And I'll show you how you can figure that out. We talked about this a little bit before. So if I have a branch like this, so here we're going to get into bending basics as Stephen wraps up the last of it. And I'm going to make this really simple, but just here's a branch that we're about to wire. And so we have gone, as I look at it this way, we've gone counterclockwise. Notice how from the side that while the branch is going out this way, that the wire is coming out of the bottom, sticking out to one side. Does that mean we're going to be able to bend the branch better this way or this way? That this way, you're all going to say, and you're all right, yeah. To your right, does that wire facilitate a bend to the right, or does it facilitate a bend to your left? A bend to the right. The way you can tell which way the spiral is most conducive to bending is, as it comes out of the bottom, whichever way the wire is pointing, that's the way, and so I'll do it so you can see it on the camera, that's the way it's best set up to bend. And so any bends in that direction, the way you're just following the wire essentially, that's how you know. You can bend it the other way, but when you're doing heavier work with bigger branches, you'll find you get better results when you're following the directionality. Now, when it comes to twisting, that one matters a lot more. When you're going to put a twist on it, you're going to do a twist that tightens the wire onto the branch. And so in this case, that means we will be, as we bend it, we're going to be putting twists in it this way, because that tightens the wire. If we bend the other way, what you will find is these giant gaps will appear. And probably none of you have ever seen that on your trees, right? No one's ever seen the gaps on there. No. You don't even know what I'm talking about. You'll also notice that we've created spirals that all go in one direction. Sometimes I'll wire a branch halfway one way and I'll switch direction on the other way so we get more interesting spirals on there. So if you caught any of that, as you start bending this, you're going to be making it. So we'll do an example. This is kind of what it looks like. Are you about where you need to be? Great. So here's what the process looks like to do all this bending. We always start bending at the base. And we're going to do a little bit of twisting. So instead of just bending, we can see how these two, okay. See this little branch right here? It's pointing out to your right. If I just bend it down, it continues pointing in the same direction. If we put a twist on that, it's now bending the opposite direction. So we already have half a twist in here. And if I do that again, it's going to have a full twist. And so we have a zig and a zag, but this is actually spiraled already one time around. And we're going to continue bending as we go until we get to the end of the branch.
Okay.
And you're going to bend the heavy one first, and you're going to start by bending, you're going to exaggerate that bend down there. I'll do this one, here's yours, and you're going to pick whatever the heaviest line, and you're going to exaggerate that bend and curve right there. Now let's just all bend them and see how it ends up.
I should exaggerate this bend more?
Well, you're going to, yes, exactly.
So,
Or watch how I do it then. So I get my fingers right in there, and I have my fingers wrapped over the top, and I'm going to, it's like I'm literally touching the tree here, here, and here on the wire. So I have one finger on one point, one finger on another, and my thumb on the back. These two are going to help guide the foliage where it needs to go. And I'm going to use all of those points, and I'm actually going to pinch it to my hand, use all of those points to get a little bit of a spiral in there. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm touching the wire at 1, 2, 3 spots, and I'm going to continue that coming around like that. And that's a very generic, simple whoop. It's our starting point of a bend. It's important to have as much contact with the branches as possible. I remember, so my teacher, Buruhana Katibi, studied in Japan with this wonderful guy, Kihachiro Kamiya, who was awesome. And he always used to say, when wiring, God gave you 10 fingers, use them all. The more contact points you have on the branch, the less likely you're going to. I was just told we have one. Are we not at one?
Oh, no, it's till 12:30.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
that's why I asked at 12:30.
Yeah.
So we're going to finish this really quickly then. So this is a big bend, and you know what we can do? If you need to start the raffle right now, we can just keep wiring. Would that be better for you?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. We'll just all do one extremely fast and then let these two kind of wire at their paces. But the idea is you want to create bends from the inside out. You want to be twisting as you go. And what you're going to end up with is going to look really funny, and that's okay. And you're going to wire every single branch on the tree, because whether or not you use it in the final design, you're going to use it for creating deadwood features.
Jonas?
Yes?
The twist you're doing, is that for the trunk to get twisting? The twisting you're doing, is that for the trunk to get the twisting striations if you're going to make deadwood?
Exactly. By twisting, it's giving us the opportunity to, in the future, create a deadwood feature or a shari on the trunk that makes the trunk look like it's twisting, because it is twisting, and it makes it way more interesting than deadwood features that just run parallel.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And it's probably the single most important thing to do. And so there's more opportunity for more wire on this. But we're all just going to be fussing up here with this. Any other last questions before they kick off the raffle? If not, I've got lots of articles on this topic on Bonsai tonight. They're all just around the website if you want to look for it. If you have questions, come on up and ask us. Otherwise, thank you so much for sticking around.